All right, greetings and welcome to the 10th installment of Fascist Maxims. And today we have from Patriot Front, Thomas Rousseau.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Thomas, thank you for coming on. So, first, let's get started with a little bit of your life story. Can you tell us, like, where you grew up, how you grew up in America, and kind of what led you to the political realization that you're at today?
Absolutely. So I've grown up in North Texas. I was born there and raised. I was not treated to the usual family experience of parents that were together, but I don't think that that has had a massive effect on me. But generally, I grew up in your standard suburban communities, which were usually devoid of most of the problems I'm out here organizing against today. And as my life went on, I became more and more, acutely aware of a lot of the changes that were coming to the nation and the country as a whole, and a lot of the forces at work, either behind the scenes or in a more present fashion. And it is a matter of public record that I did go to a high school in North Texas in the Dallas Fort Worth area that it went from more homogeneous to extremely, as you would call it, diverse in the matter of several years. And of course, I never had any personal issues with being attacked or confronted or even, you could say, discriminated against. But the fact is that I became very presently, personally aware of what type of social changes go on when you have something go from a unified populace to a wide range of divergent peoples which share less and less in common by the day. I became more aware of what happens to an institution when you treat it like some sort of global entity. And that was very largely to influence my development.
What
And but
age were you at this time when you're starting to see all this
I was going
change?
through high school, so I was
Okay.
freshman to senior year, and it was really about 16 and 17 when things took off, when I got involved in some mild journalism and started following the 2016 political, the presidential race. And I had been active politically, behind the scenes, making some memes and cartoons and various things like that for, throwaway Facebook pages. But going through the election, seeing the type of effect that I could have ultimately had an impact on me, and I realized that I can do more. And I eventually caught on to a separate activist group which I was involved with, um, just proceeding and just after the election leading up to 2017 in August, and that taught me a large variety of skills in organizing. I found out that I am not the worst person when it comes to organizing activism and events and structuring things like that. And I also became, more aware of how to tailor a message, how to create images and appeals which could concisely display my convictions, which were not necessarily developing, because at a certain point, I would say, definitely around 2016, I was certain of what I knew. I've only gotten better at explaining it. And I think, Patriot Front, which was started in 2017, has been the culmination of that, where I finally, and who knows, things may change in the future, but this is the best and most pure condensed iteration of my personal convictions. And the thing is, I've found so many other people which have come to help me with this shared vision of the nation and the future that we think is not only the best future that we can hope for, but the only necessary future that we can demand.
So when this change happened, when the homogeneous North Texas school area, when this change happened rapidly, was there something specific that triggered this change in that area, or was it just, the consequence of kind of our open borders and our globalist policies?
It was generally a more an affluent town compared to most, and a large variety of the people were brought there by the easy availability of jobs and the fact that, anybody could come in with certain visa papers. And, the school was also increasingly, open to these types of things and encouraging it. And I would say it was a lot of these visa programs alongside, the globalization of the economy, where more things are outsourced, and it also makes it easier to interchange and replace the American workforce.
Yeah,
The
it's
town was just at a crossroads of all of these things, and it had dramatic effects.
okay. I'm also in the Southwest here in Las Vegas, Nevada, and I've been living here since 93, 92, 93, and I've watched demographics change in this place like not overnight over the past 20 years, but
Hmm.
it has changed in a very large way of changing. And most of that came through. It's funny, like today, it's all about the liberals and the no borders and all this. But lot of the illegal immigration came here strictly through the conservatives out here
Hmm.
and the businesses that wanted that labor where they didn't need to pay insurance and they can pay underneath the table and pay less and non-taxable paying. So it's kind of ironic is now you see the Republicans acting like they actually want to stop this flood. But in my experience, they've always been some of the biggest encouragers of it simply for the dollar. They've obviously put money over their country. And so I've kind of witnessed the same thing being here in the Southwest.
Absolutely. And I won't say that there aren't any Republicans or people on the, general right side of the political spectrum that aren't that would not be genuine about wanting to stop, the illegal immigration, but it's just simply undeniable that there are large, embedded and entrenched forces at work within the GOP which want these people here because they have the same ultimate, they have the same visions for the future and their own place in it as, a lot of the elite Democrats or people on the left do, which is their position in these corporations or other multinational entities just leeching off of an ever growing mass of millions and millions of uprooted people,
Mhm.
which are going to have their ability to revolt against that sort of enslavement, bred out of them, throughout however many generations it'll take. And that's a whole thing that people fail to realize with an organization like ours is we're ultimately a movement for assuring sovereignty for our people, right? We have become a people that which has or is under a government which fails or refuses to advocate for us. And what we're fighting for is our ability to determine our own future. And all the people that are against us claim to want this sort of self-determination for all peoples, but they are denying it to us and almost exclusively here in America. And I would say that that is very indicative that they are either hypocrites, they are liars, some combination of the two, or they just have a particular resentment against the accomplishments and the victories and the successes of America, and they realize that perhaps we're the only ones that are our nation, our history, our revolutionary spirit. Maybe we're the only ones that are actually powerful enough to stop it.
I agree, and not only hypocrites. I think some people are ignorant to what they're really fighting against, and I think some people are completely malicious and know exactly what they're fighting against. And it is in that stage to where not only do we not have the right to look out for our interest, but you are demonized, attacked, and basically persecuted for even doing so. So it's quite an interesting wall we've been put up against in this country, and it's I don't think it'll benefit anyone in the long run. So I think it's lunacy that they're going about this. But someone in the chat asks a question, and it kind of was going to go into what my next question was kind of the creation of your party. That did it stem from members from the American Vanguard Party? Was it kind of a birth out of that into making reforming it or making something better?
Mhm.
Or I know there was some crossover with some members there, but or was it something that said we're doing it completely this way in the Patriot Front way, or is it
Gotcha. So
completely
yeah,
not connected at all?
I can explain that. I would have to nitpick first and say we aren't necessarily a party. We aren't asking for votes or money. We're asking for time and dedication and passion, most of all. But nitpicks aside. So originally starting Patriot Front, I was, obviously involved in Vanguard America previously, and a lot of the people that were there at the inception of the organization were previously involved for varying lengths of time and for varying, sections and abilities, and they did different things, were involved in Vanguard America. And of course, not everybody, the previous organization, it was not a cohesive, not everybody believed everything that was pushed out. It was a very disorganized mess, especially towards the end, obviously, because that's self evident. But a lot of the messages that you can see pushed out by VA in those times would be synonymous, consistent or cohesive with the messages that Patriot Front is pushing out today. And in that, you see the people that eventually decided to leave and start a new organization, ultimately from scratch. Um, and in the messages that are, the standard type of inflammatory for the sake of it, things like that, you might see the people who decided not to do that. So there were ultimately different, sections of the organization which wanted and had different visions for how to best organize. And the best and the brightest decided to outcompete the competition. And I think we've done a very good and evident job of showing that our decided choices of messaging, our convictions, and our approach to activism and organizing has been the more fruitful one.
No, I would totally agree with that. With being aware of what Vanguard, when they were around, and kind of what they were putting together, I completely agree with your organization and with everything. The face you given the organization, yeah, definitely a step up. So I guess how did you become the front person of Patriotic Front?
So I was always generally I was a large player in the VA, and when it was decided that me and the people that had most experience working with me in and around the events and actions I've been involved with, we decided, hey, you know what, we've had it, let's just try something else where we can actually be more efficient and able to organize for the causes that we claim, and do, support. So I was the clear candidate as someone who had the most experience in organizing up to that. And the group of people that I started the organization with, PF, were those who had worked with me the longest and through the most consistent amount of time. And it was a large consensus that, hey, this Thomas guy has done a whole lot of work and he's been pretty good about doing stuff so far. Let's keep him around until, until we find someone better or until something happens to him.
Well, so far so good, right?
Hopefully. Yeah, no, so far so good. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I gotta admit, I love the activism videos. I love how you guys are putting it together. In fact, I would just have to say, from what I've seen, it looks like your party, well, not party, your organization is
Yes.
growing. From the first demonstration video I saw in San Antonio to this last one in DC, I mean, the people out there with you have literally doubled. So that's has to be a good sign. You're able to get more people together and out there with you to do these in real life activism moments. So
Yes.
has that been kind of the trend that you're seeing? You're getting more and more members, and as you're getting more and more members, are you vetting these people? Do you know who's coming into this organization? Do you try to figure out who you're allowing in?
So absolutely, we are growing, and we have been consistently growing for the duration of our existence. And you can see that through our demonstrations and our actions. And if you follow our social media accounts, you can see that we're always doing more, dots of activism all around the country, pins in a map. And every single day, there's a new town somewhere which is being graced with stickers or posters from the organization where they were previously lacking. And as far as, of course, we are vetting our members and we do our best to make sure that the people that are getting involved are genuine about what they say they believe. We are sparing with the personal information that we ask people to provide, because the best way to prevent against the release of certain personal information is just not to have it in the first place or not to give it. So that is obviously a concern. And it is a balance between anonymity and certainty on someone's convictions and values. And you want them to be who they say they are, but you also don't want to know who they say they are or who they are, if that makes sense. So it's about balancing those things as far as vetting. But yes, absolutely, we do take lots of precautions, and it is a very much ongoing process to assure the safety of our members, alongside the protection of their personal information and identities. And that strand, that goes from behind the scenes to communications to the planning of events to even when we're actually out there, on the streets. And you can see that in the DC videos and the San Antonio videos and all those, types of actions, is that everybody's masked up, no personal information is available. I'm the only one who's usually unmasked. And that's because everybody already knows who I am. So, there's no figureheading going on. There's no people, putting themselves at any risk. And we got something like 60 people out in DC marched clear across town from the Lincoln Memorial almost down to the end of the National Mall, and not a single person has received any issues from that. So it's not only that we can organize efficiently and effectively, is we can do that with the minimal risk coming to our members and those who decide to contribute.
How are people? So when you're marching through DC with 60 people with fasci flags, red, white, and blue, masked up,
Mhm.
how are people looking at you? Like, what are the reaction you're getting from the people out there?
There were definitely some mixed reactions. Around the time we went early in the morning, as you can see, because we didn't want to have to deal with crowds going up to the steps of the Lincoln Memorial. We didn't have to want to walk around people. Also, going down the reflecting pool in National Mall, as you can see in the video, we didn't want to have to move over or be unable to actually form, the kind of formation that we had going down with so many joggers and things going past. But there were still pedestrians around, and many people saw us, and there were definitely some mixed reactions. A lot of joggers walking down certain sides of the pathways would just immediately divert their path and go another way, or people would stop and pull out their phones. I think there's actually a video on Twitter which has gotten a few thousand views of a very nice, vibrant and ethnic woman outside of some office building that we were passing by, filming and saying, oh my God, what are they doing? What's going on? And of course, we were very polite to everybody we passed. If we even talked to them, I believe I passed certain joggers, mouths agape, and I said, "Good morning. How are you doing?" So definitely a lot of mixed reactions, and of course, you can see others in different demonstrations we've done. I think we did one in front of the Alamo in San Antonio, which is a sorry example of the ethnic replacement that's been going on in Texas and how such sovereignty is at risk, and there may have been 40 to 60, Hispanics, Mexicans, Guatemalans, whatever, out there looking and gawking. Of course, not one of them did anything in any ways of confrontations, but definitely got some reactions. People pull out their cell phones, put on a show.
That's what I love about the optics of these little activist moments is they're completely masculine. You're going to get a lot less people willing to do something to you guys when you present yourselves like that. It's when these cowardly groups like Antifa, it's when they see weakness, when they outnumber you, is when they try to attack you. So I always love that there's a strong presence in your activism when you're there and with your members, and you can see you're gonna when you present yourself as men, you're less likely to deal with these children, when they come with their attacks and everything else. So
Absolutely, because
yeah.
it's never just Antifa either. It's
Mhm.
it's the unholy trinity of Antifa, the media, and then the police force, and they're all working together in some way or another, whether they realize it or not,
Yeah.
to inhibit your organizing and to harm your members. And the best way to do it is just not to invite them to your event. And that's what you do when you announce things ahead of time, whether you realize it or not. You could see a lot of Antifa on Twitter and other various platforms complaining that we didn't invite them to the party in Washington, so they couldn't bring their police handlers and their journalist buddies to come and dox, harass, and harm people, because we have nothing to gain from that. You're not our target demographic. If anything, the people on online platforms are, or the people that are actually in the public space that we are reaching are. Because when you invite lots of Antifa to your events, they're coming in from all around. They're coming in from out of town. They're even out of state. They are not the public. They're not the people you're trying to reach. You're trying to reach the actual people that are walking around where they live, where they actually are on a normal day. And Antifa, they claim to represent the public, but they
Yeah.
nothing of the sort.
They're a bunch of bourgeois dumpster dwellers. I mean, it's ridiculous that I always found that funny. There's two good things, well, two aspects I really love what you're doing with the organization that are out of the norm with a lot of these groups that have also come out. And that's first, typically all these groups would have membership fees, and there was no vetting at all. I've been member of two like official groups in my time, and there was no vetting at all, and there was a lot of shitty members because of that. And it was always about just send in your monthly dues, and that was it. That's all these organizations really cared for. And so I like that it's like this. I don't know. It's kind of a double-edged sword because in order to grow, you're going to need money. I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
just kind of, a necessary evil, unfortunately. But
Mm-hmm.
at the same time, it's just not a cash grab. It is a lot of these organizations seem to be where it's like pay your dues, and we really don't care who you are as long as you're paying your dues.
Mm-hmm.
So I have to appreciate that. And also the other thing is, like you said, we don't announce ahead of time when we're coming. I always find it funny when these groups who are like anti-system call the police and say, hey, we're going to be here, can you be there to protect us? And it's, well, they're
It
not
doesn't make
really
much
doing it.
sense.
It doesn't make much sense at all. And like you said, they're even though the individual police officer would probably agree with a lot of what we're saying, uh, their food on the table comes with doing their job, and to feed their
Mhm.
family is priority number one to them. So when they're told to repress you, to shut you down, to use force against you, they will. And they're always going to be told to do that to, quote unquote, extremists,
Mhm.
more so than they do with the leftists. So it's, yeah, it never works out really. Like you said, you're pretty much tipping off the enemy to do all these things to you, to outnumber you, to circle you, to dox you, to attack you, to whatever else, when you ask for their protection.
You're ultimately playing a game that stopped, being on the table 10 years ago, if not more. And you're acting as if you have, sympathy within all these institutions that no longer exists. And you just need to be on top of all of the information that you contain. And if you are ever giving information to your opposition, whether that is the media, whether that is the police institutions, whether that is, Antifa or political opposition, or just generally disseminating it to the public, you always need to be of the mind, is this helping me or hurting me? Is this helping them, or is it not allowing them to hurt me? So, that's a big thing. And as far as dues and money goes, of course, that is always a topic of how to manage things like funds and finance with organizations. And, it's a bit of a pitfall if you let it, be one of those to you. And a big thing is that and it's kind of a general philosophy, is that you shouldn't have money for nothing, right? People shouldn't be just paying just to exist. They shouldn't just be sitting around in a chat room or, a forum or anything like that and just paying you every month just for the sake of it. There should be, something tangible involved. You are creating value, and that can be done, through something like starting a member-owned business, right? Whether that's even, providing things that activists use, like posters or stickers or shirts or patches or hats or whatever. You starting those types of things, where you're running it and you're actually providing a value. And of course, your members then need to purchase those things, obviously. And that's how an organization can create internal revenue, by creating a sort of internal economy, taking away as much as possible from these large multinational corporations, which everybody seems to exclusively purchase things from nowadays. And, I'm really sorry to all the sweatshop laborers in China and Bangladesh, but I don't want your stuff anymore if I can help it in any way.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it's like you said, everyone's doing that. I think we're all guilty of that. And it's just kind of this globalist system we're in, where we are supporting these big corporations. And unfortunately, there's not too many other outlets to do otherwise. And I think that's one of the things I've always kind of been a little bit disheartened about in this big tent scene is we don't have our own community, in the sense that where if someone gets doxxed and loses their job because of so, we don't have a community where someone can say, hey, here's a job. It's like, I
Mhm.
agree with your beliefs, and I got your back. Don't worry, you can feed your family. I have this company, come work for me, and stuff like that. Like, we don't have that. Maybe on small levels, we have certain people that can do that and that
Mhm.
have done that, but we don't have a community where people can fear not being doxxed, because if
Mhm.
it comes to putting food on the table, they're going to be afraid of being doxxed. And because, as you know, you're painted as the ultimate evil just for simply having these beliefs.
Mhm.
So it's unfortunate. We still, do you see a trend going towards where we're going to be able to build this kind of loose community where we can look out for each other if someone gets doxxed and loses their job because they're speaking up for the rights of Americans? Or or do you see the opposite? Is it going further from that? Are people more afraid of getting doxxed and therefore less likely to be a part of some kind of community?
Absolutely. I would say the trend is absolutely and certainly going towards our ability to counter these measures with these types of community outreach programs, and the initiative that we can take upon ourselves to help those who have invested in us, and we can invest back into them. And that's the mindset you need to come at it from. Besides that, doxing also, we're always exploring new and more efficient ways to not even get them able to that point, right? You need to make sure that your members are as, as much of a ghost as possible. They can be anywhere doing anything, and they can be anyone. They're the person at the cash register in the grocery store. They're the person, fixing your tire at a mechanic shop. They're the pilot on your plane, or anything like that. They could be anyone, and that's the idea. So you have to let your enemy either attack no one or attack everyone, and I'm not sure which they would choose based on that, right?
Yeah.
But absolutely, and it is hard to publish. It's hard to talk about these things. It's hard to show that these networks are growing, and that these community, resources are getting more sturdy and, better against the pressure of, deplatforming initiatives. But that's definitely on the way. It's definitely growing, and where there's a will, there's a way. There's so many different ways that people can find a living and create value among a community. And the more people we have looking actively for something like that, the more likely it is that that process is going to speed up and accelerate towards the eventual goal where doxing is not even a viable tactic anymore. And ultimately that's going to happen when polarization comes to a point, or the counter polarization just comes to a point where we're perfectly allowed to affiliate with the people that share our interests and goals, and they're perfectly allowed to affiliate with the people that share their interests and goals, however much we may not like that. But we form our parallel societies in a way, and these community initiatives are ultimately part of that. And of course, that's not something that is always advantageous or something that's favorable, but it's happening, and we have to be at terms with reality and come at that from the best way we can, of how to make sure we get we don't get a raw deal.
Yeah. And part of it with the doxing though, sometimes I don't know, I kind of look at it to where if you're presenting yourself, as a decent and righteous person or someone with integrity, then I mean, if you get doxxed, you get doxxed. I mean, you deal with it, I guess.
Mhm.
I have very little sympathy for these people that will are just internet trolls, and they say like vile things that
Mhm.
they would never say in real life. Then they get doxxed because they pissed off the wrong journalist or the wrong spurg online or something, and
Mhm.
they go and put their information out there. I have a lot, I not too much empathy for people like that, because I don't know. To me, it's like a form of cowardice when you're wearing this mask in society, but online you're just saying vile things you would never say, or we wouldn't even want to be attached to, right?
Mhm.
And, I don't know. So it's kind of a double-edged sword for me as well. It's where it's like sometimes I feel like people need to get doxxed so they can understand, who are you really? What do you really believe? What's really important in your life?
Mhm.
And I think we've seen it work both ways. People have been doxxed and they've run away, and people have been doxxed and they've even gone more into their activism because they have had no other choice. So I don't know. It's kind of
Mhm.
worked out both ways. We've seen with people being doxxed in the recent past.
Absolutely. And it is kind of unfortunate that for a lot of people, something like that needs to happen, or not needs to, but can happen to them. And it can be a character building experience. Of course, with these community networks and these ability to have people working towards a common goal, you find out who a person is among those of a like mind. When you're meeting up in person, when you're engaging in these actions together, you really find out what a lot of people are like, under pressure, or, as far as planning things goes and being mindful. And in that way, their true self is on display only within a very, scheduled and a very controlled environment, so to speak. And you can find out who they are, and you can work on those personality flaws, if there are any, once you have that environment, a proactive and, constructive environment to take that approach from.
So how did you get into third position politics? Because Patriot Front is very Americana,
Mhm.
but it's typically when people think Americana, they're going to attach it right to the Constitution.
Mhm.
And your politics seem more third position. So how did you come to a third position kind of
Mhm.
belief? And then how do you intertwine that with Americana?
Absolutely. So I would say at the very core of our message is that the state is not the nation, right? That we have a government which no longer advocates for our people as a nation. We have a globally minded government ruling over a nationally rooted people, and of course that's, dysfunctional as ever. So we come at all those things as far as, what type of economic system has America, historically been experiencing. You know, that's ultimately irrelevant because that's been put onto us by a government which no longer serves the interests of the people, and you could even argue has become an enemy of the people as far as many of its institutions go. And of course, I'm a young guy, and I have experienced you could say the plight that a lot of young Americans feel in an economy which just sucks the life out of people. And it's as if a lot of people have not much else to live for besides, paying their taxes and earning enough money to just barely get by so they can take more pills and watch more daytime television, just enough to get them to the next week. And I've seen that firsthand with a lot of people, and it's really sad. And you have to, take that. You have to realize, maybe the free market isn't as free as people say it is. Maybe you see a lot of these things, you see a lot of professions which are being overcome by automation and foreign, invasive populations, which are coming in and serving the interests of not even themselves. They're serving the interests of the elite people who brought them there at the expense of the nation which created the very government which should be advocating for them. And I've seen all these things firsthand, and I'm, definitely not someone who's some type of, capitalistic, absolutist. And, I wouldn't necessarily call myself a socialist, but you have to come to mind that the economy is something that is ultimately an entity that should serve the people and not the other way around, right? Money has meaning based on the people that give it meaning. And, life should give meaning to money and not the other way around. And any way you can format, the government and the economy, which you are sure can actually provide the best life for the people, where people aren't struggling to get by just so they can live a meaningless life. When you don't have that anymore, then you can actually say that your economy is something which serves the people as opposed to the other way around.
So what do you say to these people when they say they see the fascist symbol and they go, "That's not America. We fought them in World War II." And so, like, what is your response to that kind of mentality?
Well, it's funny because we got people saying that to our demonstration in D.C., and we only had to point out that the fasces was also on the monuments we were demonstrating right in front of.
Yep.
It's a traditional American symbol, and it's also a symbol that embodies the core of Western civilization, of strength and unity, and the power of a unified nation that can ultimately have an influence and reach and prominence throughout the world. That's what the symbol encapsulates, and of course, that's not the pure heart of our symbol, or that's not the only part of our logo. It's a symbol of tradition embedded inside of the 13 stars, this American symbol of revolution, right? So it's the balance between the new and the old, and tradition and revolution. It's ultimately, it's a very meaningful statement that we make. And people say that, oh, use that symbol and it makes you a fascist. And I just say, if wanting my people to determine their own future makes me a fascist, then okay. If I have such a disdain for all of these people, usually on our political opposition, who use these labels and slurs, or they use these actually meaningful terms as meaningless slurs. And I have no patience for them. I've never, as long as I've been a part of Patriot Front, I have never once given any credence to any journalist who says I am a racist, white supremacist, neo-Nazi, literally Hitler and all of his people. It's completely ridiculous, and anybody who's arguing that type of thing is too dishonest to even explain what the actual symbol means. And anybody who actually is favorable to your politics, favorable to the convictions which you hold, then you can explain that to them. The types of people that are usually bringing those things up are so dishonest that no amount of explanation will make it to them. And ultimately, if they want to attack us, they have to attack the history of America, because that's what we stand for. We stand for the American people and their future and influence. And hey, if you want to attack everybody else, while you're attacking me, you go ahead.
Yeah, and I kind of love something about your activism and the stickers you put out there. When the media responds to them, they're like, "These evil Nazis, look at this, keep America American." How dare they? I love
People have to ask themselves,
yeah.
how are these in people, because the media is saying it clearly. They're admitting that somehow these illegals are making America less American, and everybody watching is mentally asking themselves, why is that?
Mhm.
And then you start getting there, because there's just no there's no viable way for these talking head pundits to respond to our message, because their standard slurs, their demonization tactics, they don't work anymore, you know.
Yeah, no, I love the irony that's pointed out on that, because the viewer asks too. They're like, well, what's wrong with keeping America American? And how are these people Nazis for doing that? So I just kind of love that contradiction the media has to do to themselves. Now, speaking about that, so as to what is American, and I understand your definition of it, and
Mhm.
but just for the people in the chat that might not know, when you say keep America American, and when you're speaking about Americans, you're
Mhm.
specifically talking about white Americans, correct?
Yes, so that America is a nation and a history of our ancestors who came over and created the nation, right? The American Revolution was a culmination of a socio-cultural, process of events which culminated in Americans saying we are no longer European. We are no longer the same nation of Britain, Europe, Germany, Sweden, all those other places where we feel like we can be governed by the same government as one of those separate, now foreign nations, right? It was Americans saying we are no longer European, we are indigenous to this continent, we have the right to determine our own future as a people. And then they created the United States of America, the government which has now become, less favorable than it once was. So that's ultimately the story of history which we are promoting, because it's true. And the people that did those things were overwhelmingly of European, stock. They were the founding stock of the nation, and you have seen that up until fairly recently in the story of history, the story of America was the story of these people that were descendant from the European pioneers, settlers, colonizers, all those things. These great people who did great things. And I'm not here to apologize for any of the things that they might have did which were wrong, right? What I am here is to preserve the actual people that they created. They created a unique nation on the earth. We don't have anywhere. People say, you can go back to Europe. I'm not European. I don't have anywhere to run off to, right? My family's been here since the 1650s, and I'm as indigenous to this continent as any native at this point, if not more, I could argue. And you have all these people, saying, well, it's funny, right? You can go to a bunch of places around the globe and say, and ask them to picture an American in their head, and they won't picture someone who has lineage in Africa or Central America
No,
or
John Wayne.
Asia.
John
Exactly.
Wayne is typically what. Yeah.
America, the nation, is understood as a unique, ethnic, homogeneous people in just about every corner of the world outside of the country itself. And it's kind of sad, but the fact is, it's just such a powerful appeal, and it's such just a powerful thing to say to people, because everybody already knows it's true. And the only people that are claiming that anything otherwise are dishonest, and they're just looking to create a new warped version of America that they had no business in creating, and they want something like that to serve their interests as part of some, you know, global project which can only end in harming everybody involved.
Yeah, I think that was one of the flaws of the Constitution, was they really wanted to make a governmental system based off of laws, and they
Mm-hmm.
kind of ignored that a nation is something deeper than laws.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of opened the door to 1965, essentially, in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
And so now with that, let's go down this road of, so yes, Americans, it comes from a European background, from the
Yes.
heritage of Europe, and it's grown since then. So,
Mm-hmm.
and now we've become white Americans, essentially. Like I said, this is our allegiance to America now.
All Americans are white, not all whites are American. Yes.
There, okay, there you go. And so now the world we're in right now, let's guesstimate what, it's probably 60% white in this country now. Would you say, what would you guesstimate as far as our population?
That wouldn't be an unfair guess, no.
Okay. So two things now. So we have this 40% non-white population.
Mm-hmm.
What happens with this? How do we deal with this? And then on top of that, how do you convince, if there's an absolutist position on race in this country, how do you
Mm-hmm.
convince the majority of white people who seem to reject that
Mm-hmm.
into accepting that? So like what's the long term with this, with the whites and non-whites in this country? Um, can it work? Does there need to be separation? Will there be separation? How will that come about, etc.? Like, give me your, and I know it's a vague thing, no one has a definite answer for, but just give me your, thinking down the road.
So when you understand that the nation is not the state, and the state is certainly no longer the nation, a lot of the things that we are doing are not necessarily from a political or policy-based perspective. People sometimes ask me, what are your policy proposals? How do you suggest legislation to fix these things? And I answer, I don't know, because that's not where I'm going, right? We have no business in dictating policy in a government that has long since been completely shut off to us, at least in any type of sphere that can cause, can create solutions to the problems we're having to deal with. So I fully realize that the United States of America, the federal government, can give citizenship to just about anyone it wants based on any sort of economic, or sinister motive that they can have. And ultimately, it doesn't matter if Americans are 60% of the population of the United States, or they're 20%, 10%, as long as Americans exist on this earth as a population, we need to have the ability to organize amongst ourselves, to promote our interests, to be able to further the cause of the nation, even if that nation no longer has a state, or even if the nation would be spread out over several states, right? There are many examples in the world of nations without states, which are fighting to create, either a new state for them, or fighting for recognition for the government that rules over them to actually not necessarily cater to their interests, but just recognize that they have a right to determine their own future, and they should be represented in that way, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of that. And you also have nations, there are nations such as, the diaspora of Israel, and the Jewish people, who are a nation without a state, right?
Mm-hmm.
They exist all over the globe, but yet they would not exist if they did not have a loyalty to their collective nation, right? If they didn't realize that they were all more similar to each other than they were to all the various other populations of the countries they're in, they would have stopped existing a long time ago, right? So that's another thing to consider. And what we were fighting for, and I think I'm going to try to quote it, but this is from one of our articles, we're fighting for the social and cultural realization of the nation as a natural entity, right? So we want people to realize America for what it is, and not everybody's going to do that. But the fact is, we are going to create, it's going to be a matter of showing more than telling in a lot of cases. We are going to create, a new movement, which is just full of so much life and dynamism and progress and improvement among its members and its people and everybody who decides to, affiliate and grow that cause, that it is going to become undeniable that this is the best way to not only structure, someone's mentality alongside the truth, but it's going to create a lifestyle of those who are building the future. Right? Beyond that, any form, the ultimate end goal, right, is the nation's representation within a state apparatus, within some sort of government or a part of that government which, advocates for its future. That can be the current government, that can be a new government, that could be several governments all working in unison. That's completely outside of my ability to determine the future, right? People talk a lot about secession or civil war and things like that. And the fact is, right now, well, if the status quo breaks, bends, or shatters, that doesn't only make your cause more available to be furthered, it makes everybody's cause more available to be furthered, right? And you need to ask yourself, who's in the best position to create effective change if something like that were to happen? And the unfortunate answer is, right now, it's not us, right? So another thing that we need to be mindful of is that we have a landscape and a reality right now, which is unlikely to have any type of cataclysmic change in at least the foreseeable future. Of course, there's always the future you can't foresee, but it's hard to plan for something that you can't see. So we need to plan for the reality that's at our doorstep, and we need to be able to effectively organize amongst ourselves for any situation which might happen, right? And we need to be flexible in our tactics enough to the point where, again, like I said, maybe something happens and it's this government which can secure our interests. Maybe it's a new government. Maybe it's several governments. Maybe it's no government. Well, maybe not. But there's a whole variety of things that we need to be open to. But the end goal, the conviction, the universal principle is that the nation deserves a state which ensures its existence. And any way that we meet that is tactics. It's pragmatic. It's up to your situation and your resources, and we need to be open to however way we can get there. But right now, we just need to build the resources, the networks, the community infrastructure, and the actual message, and get more people on board.
Okay, great answer. Great answer. I mean, I think that explains it very well. And it's like you said, pragmatic. And like on that, first someone in the chat asked, did I ever reach out to Casa Pound rep for an interview? Twice already, and I'll do it 3 or 4 times. I'll keep trying to get Casa Pound on here as well. So talking about being pragmatic and adapting strategy. What do you think about, would you ever think you would have members that would take off the mask, maybe not publicly align themselves with the organization, but run for local politics simply on third position stances, and try, like, do you have any belief in populism at all, that there can be a populist revolt in this country and that can be led by promoting like third position ideology? Or do you think just staying out of the political realm altogether and being an organization on its own is the way to go? Or are you open to everything?
So absolutely, I have a belief in populism, right? A lot of our message is based around, a popular opposition to an elite government which denies them, sovereignty. So of course I believe in populism and tactics as to how you want to use or influence or take advantage of certain government availabilities to achieve that end goal is, again, that's fluid. And if there were members of the organization or people who were affiliated who might be, looking into local offices, who might already be occupying positions with institutions, of course, that wouldn't be something we would say publicly, right? So if that was happening, then of course it ultimately depends on the viability of something like that. And it has to be case by case, because in most cases, you're looking at localized positions in localized institutions. And the country and the continent is so big that there's so many places where something like that is viable and so many places like that where it isn't. So you have to be, again, you have to be practical in your approaches, and you have to be able to determine if this is viable considering the amount of work that we're going to input to get something like this, and as far as the social capital needed to reach something like that. And also you need to be mindful of how many people can you influence with one of these lower level government positions as someone who can't say too much without getting kicked out, as opposed to how many people you could influence as far as, an organization where you are anonymous, but you are completely, steadfast in your convictions, where you can influence anybody who is willing to come to you and work with you. So that's a risk reward comparison that you need to make, and you want that ratio to be favorable. And of course, if we were doing those things, we wouldn't want to name anybody officially.
Of course. Oh, good. So do you think, like personally, I think the whole Trump thing like changed the whole landscape in this country. Personally, I was a little black pilled before all that happened, and then I saw, like, with his first initial response, that first 30% that were fanatically behind him. To me, that was the third positionists right there. That was the working class. That was the people that weren't Republicans and weren't Democrats, were just sick of what was going on. It's did you see it the same way? Are you optimistic about there's this crowd to build upon now, or do you view him as completely horrible, more of the same stuff? Or like, what was your whole opinion of the whole Trump effect? And is it a wave we can ride and take over, or is it a wave that's going to come down and crush us?
So ultimately, I have, more of a moderate position on Trump, that he's good when he does good things and he's bad when he does bad things. And he has done plenty of those. Of course, he hasn't implemented a whole lot of what he has planned to implement or said that he plans to implement. And it's very difficult to see how much of that is because of his own desire or lack of desire to implement these things, and how much of it is due to just the fact that the government is beyond corrupt, and you have these entrenched interests which are so completely at odds with him in these things. And that's really hard to determine, because obviously those things aren't available to the public. So people can argue that he should and could be much more able to promote a lot of the interests in preserving the nation as he once claimed. But as far as why he isn't doing that, it's hard to say. So also, as far as, the Trump movement, I don't think Trump created it so much as that movement and him discovered one another while the election was ongoing. he was able to touch on an American population which was already fed up, which already knew what nationalism meant, which was already willing to support some movement, entity, individual who was pushing back against what is ultimately the denial of their future. And he was able to tap into that. And the fact that he was on a large scale is fact that it exists, that there are these people who are willing to organize. And unfortunately, a lot of people have learned, the harsh lesson of American electoral politics, or, they're not necessarily even American anymore, but electoral politics within the United States of America, which is that what you say isn't always what you get, or what you vote for isn't always, if it is ever, what you get. So, a good approach, which I've, have been talking about and actually demonstrating, is that you can't have a simple from the top down change in your standing, in your future as a people. You need to come from the bottom up as well. You need them, and then ultimately you meet in the middle, and that's when you drive your enemies into the sea, as it were.
That is populism from the bottom up. And like you said, there is no, this system, even if Trump was everything he said he was, which obviously is not, but even if he was, he couldn't do anything. I mean, I remember when Ron Paul was running for office, and all the libertarians were like, oh, Ron Paul. So, well, even if he won, he couldn't do anything he would want to have done with this system. So I think it's been great to where this whole presidency has kind of shown, destroyed many of the myths of this democracy. And we see how politicized judges are. We see how politicized the FBI is. And we're starting to see these things because we always kind of believed in this myth of, everyone respects the law. We will agree to disagree, and society goes forward like that. Well, now the left has always kind of known that was a lie, and they use that lie to their advantage. But now, the quote unquote right, at least some factions of it, are seeing how much of a lie that is. So I think it's done. This whole election has done damage beyond repair to this, facade of democracy in this country, which is, I think, is great for us. But you make the great point. If everything fell down today, are we in the position to take power? No, we're not, unfortunately. Unfortunately, the same kind of people who are in power now would still be the people that rise to the top of it, unfortunately, because they're most set for that right now. So it's, I don't know, it's once again another double-edged sword to where we need to build a strong community in order to have any kind of power as this democracy kind of fades away. Because I think it is. I think we're going in that direction. I don't know how you feel about it, but I'd love to get your take on when we're seeing people like Bernie Sanders get all the support with this kind of welfare socialism shit. And we're seeing that Alexandria Cortez, the lady from New York, who is also an open socialist. So we're seeing more people open to this ideology. And it kind of pisses me off because as a third positionist, we know we have the best kind of economic in between capitalism and communism. Yes. But the only thing that Americans or people in America are hearing right now is either socialism or capitalism, and they're making their choice based off of that. So do you see people like Bernie Sanders and Alexandria Cortez on their rise as an opportunity for us, or do you see it as a threat to us?
So I'll first start by saying you're absolutely correct in how entrenched all these bureaucrats and government officials are, to where the point where democracy in this country is less about the people that do get elected and more about the people that don't, right? All of these shady bureaucrats, investors, lobbyists, bankers, and so on and so forth, which ultimately pull more strings than the people that actually have popular votes or, electoral college votes behind them. And as far as, you have candidates which are coming out more socialist and, and the GOP has only really resorted out, outside of Trump to become more capitalist in response to that. And it's generally symptomatic of the results of the two-party system, which everyone, up to and including, George Washington said was a really bad idea. And if only people listened to him. So, and of course, Americans are already used to picking between two lesser evils, and maybe the whole capitalist versus socialist thing is a symptom of that. But absolutely, it is good nonetheless that the status quo is being widened, because because that brings people open to problems which they had not previously considered. And even as as some norms are being broken, even in the wrong direction, there is still a presented opportunity, because you are driving the centrist, neoliberal, standardized elite, which does not want to follow along in these socialistic influences, right? They like everything just like it's going, and they don't want any unexpected things. So you're even driving them out of their comfort zone in a way, or even people like the Cortez lady are doing that. So even that could present some form of opportunity in the fact that people are going to get used to exploring problems, or they're going to realize that the solutions to their problems may exist just outside of that status quo, which they've been so locked inside of for so long.
What what would you see as directly positive in our modern day context of what's going on right now? What are some of the things you're seeing that make you extremely optimistic about the near future? Or
Okay,
is there?
absolutely. So a big thing that motivates me and tells me that we do have a future, and it is going to be one of accomplishment and progress in our goals, is that I interact with the people that I work with, in the organization every single day, almost all day. And I just see so many people who are so absolutely dedicated, and they have such a high potential. And there's so many people with so many skills and fantastic backgrounds that are they're coming to the cause, and they're realizing that this is what they want to do. And that, of course, is one of the most motivating factors. It's why I keep doing this stuff. It's why I do a lot of the really, a lot of, it's why I push through a lot of the things that aren't always super enjoyable, that people don't really think about when they're talking about political organizations. There's a lot of tedium. There's a lot of things that aren't always so glamorous. And that's why I do all those things, because I'm so motivated by all the people that I've had the, opportunity to work with. Besides that, you have a general, consensus among the population, which is growing, and a general, there is a trend among a lot of politicians, which is teaching them that you don't gain as much as you think you do from compromising to your opposition, from showing your soft underbelly as soon as the media says something bad about you, or some journalist decides to call you one of the bad words that they have in their little dictionary. So that's something that is very, it's very, what's the word I'm looking for? It makes me happier about our future, and it makes me more optimistic. And a lot of, also, you have all the attacks and the pressures that are coming at us from, these massive corporations and the media, and even smaller institutions as well. And I see so many people which are being proactive and exploring solutions to these things. And ultimately, we are creating a movement which is, at the end of the day, not going to be able, or not going to be, it is not going to present a solid target to any of these institutions, which are so reliant upon other movements doing so. And we are ultimately going to have strategies and tactics which can outsmart, outmaneuver, and outorganize our opposition, to the point where their antiquated ways of response will have to be either trashed or rethought. And if we can think faster than they can, then we can keep it up.
Yeah, and their words are losing power, right? They've watered down fascist, Nazi, white supremacist. They've called gay Jews white supremacists. So it's pretty much watered down when they've reached that point. So yeah, I think it's interesting enough when speaking with quote unquote normies or whatever, that even speaking with them, that everyone's kind of wondering, like, how did things get so bad? Why are we so easy to be shamed? And when they look at like what's really the weapon used against us and what's going on, it's shame. And there's
Mm-hmm.
nothing outside of that. It's shame. So it's when we see people, and I think this was a big thing, kind of Trump exposed, that unfortunately people didn't jump on the bandwagon more, where he just wouldn't apologize for anything he was saying or doing that the media was attacking him for. He would double down on, and he was bulletproof because of that. And we see when people make the mistake of apologizing, of essentially cucking, as the term goes now, to the enemies, it never works out. It never works out. They'll just jump on you more and attack you more because they've seen that weakness.
Hmm.
So yeah, I think once we show that we can't be shamed for wanting a better country, we can't be shamed for wanting a future for our children, we can't be shamed for wanting high culture in this country, that they lose all their power. It's unfortunate. It's we're kind of, being destroyed without any weapons, essentially, just through these psychological attacks on us. So
Hmm.
I think your organization is just another good example of when people will not back down to being shamed, that it shows strength. And I think that that gives and invigorates other people, which I can imagine is why your organization is growing, and why, like, we see whenever you do things like this or JF's show or Heel Turn, anywhere you've been on, the chat as, which is usually a hostile chat for people,
Hmm.
has been overwhelmingly positive in your directions. I think people are seeing what you're doing there.
There's something valuable about being the first man over the hill, and showing people that if you do it right, if you do it smart, you can actively organize in defiance of all these forces, of all these people, and you can do it effectively. You can do it safely. You can do it, which, you can mitigate the risks involved, and you can stick it to them, to be a bit informal about it. And they can too. And, a lot of people look at our demonstrations, and it's not too difficult to see themselves behind one of those red, white, and blue masks. And that's ultimately what we want to tell people, is that, there's a place for you. There's something that you can do, whether it is demonstrations, whether it's smaller forms of activism, whether it's writing things, whether it's, making images, whether it's running accounts, whether it's doing any sort of, activist job. You need to do something, whether that is something that is outside of your skills or whether it's in the skills you already have. But we need to tell people, and we're showing people, that there's something that you can do, and the only thing you can't afford to do is nothing.
Yeah, and nothing gets us, what, destroyed. I don't think anyone. I think most people want to do something, they just don't know what to do.
Hmm.
And when they see organizations like yours, that at least gives them something to do, at least something to support at the very least. But yeah, I think most people I've spoken to, uh, white and non-white, don't like the direction the country's going, and I think we can build on that. And
Hmm.
I think it's this power, it's or this negativity. It seems like it's so powerful, but it's really just a few people who, control the media,
Hmm.
who promote these kind of messages in public schooling. It's a very select elite, and it's like it's not as big as they think it is. And I think people just really think the system is bigger than it really is. But we are more numerous than the system, so
Hmm.
it's just coming to that understanding that we can control our own destiny. And I think we're slowly getting to that position, but I do think it's going to take people outside the box, outside of the conservative beltway, outside the red team and the blue team, to get in there and to really put forth this message. And
Hmm.
I think you guys are doing a wonderful job of that. And I would love to see us reach a stage where more people third position minded are running for like politics, and not even to win, but just to get the voice out there, to get on a
Hmm.
platform outside of the internet, essentially, and be able to have hardworking Americans at least hear our positions on economics, on nationalism. So I think we're reaching that stage, and we'll kind of start winding this down. But as we do, if the chat has any questions for Thomas, put at Fascist Maxims so they can be highlighted, and we'll take a couple questions if you don't mind, Thomas.
Not at
And
all.
then, yeah, and then we'll kind of wind it down from there. Once again, I do appreciate you coming on here. I do appreciate what you guys are doing. I know in this big tent scene right now, we have a lot of people that like to criticize each other, but I think there are many different roads to victory, and seeing people take these many different roads, I think, is highly necessary and highly advantageous to us. I think the only people that should be shunned are those that deserve to be shunned through their actions, and exposing themselves as either liars, hypocrites, or people just out there to make a shekel or two. So,
Absolutely.
question is, does your guest have any advice for those of us who are alone i.e., those of us, those who have fellow fascists. So guys that are kind of, they can't become a part of a group, or they're isolated in that sense. What would you give like as a personal advice for this kind of person?
Well, I would say if you're anywhere near our membership requirements, no matter where you are in the country, it's very likely that you're close to some of our other activists. So I would say the solution is obviously to join Patriot Front. Of course, I'm biased in that solution, just a tad. But outside of that, I would say that, you know, you are able to do so much, especially if you're someone who's young. You have such a wide amount of resources available just given the time that you have, and you can engage in all sorts of actions of self-improvement, and you can make yourself someone who will naturally draw others to you. And if you are steadfast in your convictions, even if you don't talk about politics, you just have to show that your lifestyle is one that is based in your convictions, and people will see that and naturally gravitate towards you. And just being a present, and able person of that stature is something that will naturally bring people towards you. But if you want to expedite that process, then joining Patriot Front probably isn't the worst thing you could do.
Yeah, and 100% right on self-improvement. 100% right. Someone asked, what is your stance on religion?
So we don't necessarily have a religious component to our message because obviously those are muddy waters, and America, the nation, has, historically been composed of members of the nation which have been from all walks of Christianity. And we do have members of the organization which do follow more paganistic faiths as well. And of course, we don't necessarily, we don't discriminate based on that. But of course, there are certain, we do not want our members to be following religions which would be considered foreign to our people, or, the Europe or its diaspora. So, obviously, and, there's a whole variety of different things. Obviously, we don't want people which are against, the convictions of other members as far as religion goes. But generally, it's something that don't we don't have a religious component in our message, and we also, do pretty well with members just not really arguing about it. Of course, people have their discussions, but keep the disagreements on a minimum because we have bigger problems at hand.
Right. It's a personal thing for people to figure out, right, for
Mhm.
themselves. Someone asked, what do you think about Richard Spencer? I guess, what do you think about him as a person, or as a, I don't know. I don't quite know the context to his question in that.
So yeah, I mean, I think I've met Richard Spencer at least twice, maybe, and very brief interactions. And he's never actually sat down to talk to me, so I can't say too much about him as a person. I would say that I don't disagree with a lot of the points that he brings up in his various articles and podcasts. I do think his theory of a nation is perhaps a bit flawed. He puts a lot of the problems to the dysfunctionality on the of the current system and standing of the country onto the American culture, where it could be better placed onto these globalistic elites. But besides that, there have been some obviously pitfalls that Spencer has engaged in terms of actions and forms of activism which haven't been as cost effective. But then again, no one's really done a lot of this stuff before, so there is going to be trial and error. So you can't always blame people for things like that. Of course, I've never taken any actions to hinder Spencer, and we have actually had people that have worked with Spencer on events in the past. So, I guess that's what I think.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. And I would say to people, like, if they want a different figurehead for the alt-right, then find someone better than Spencer.
Mhm.
I think that would be hard to do for them. Okay, someone asked about, do you have any literature in the works which will explain your platform more?
So there is, of course, there's lots of reading material on the website as far as articles and the manifesto itself goes, and the various quotes involved. As far as any expounding on that, as far as any books or extra pamphlets, those might appear over time, but there's not anything directly in the works as far as creating a longer form version of it, since it is already pretty decently long as it is.
Yeah, go check out the website, guys. A lot is explained there. The mentalities there, the spirits there. I think these are the main things you need to see, as far as not even worrying about the ins and outs of what each their stances are on each political issue. The black shirts in Italy were much the same way as were most fascistic organizations, that they were not fully defined even when they came into power. because it was more about the spirit of what they were representing, which is what spoke to people. And I think it'd be the same with this.
Absolutely.
Someone asked, my question is, how do you use propaganda to promote your local movement?
So none of what we use is actually propaganda, but we promote the organization with lots of, reading material and literature and promotional materials, and we do that via lots of means. As far as we are constantly putting up stickers, posters, various forms of material all over the country, all over various cities. And beyond that, we do have a wide network of social media accounts and individuals who are creating content through those, and they're spreading that on various platforms across the internet. And beyond that, we are also having people or myself appear on podcasts to answer questions and talk to people. And that's, hey, if we're reaching people right now, that's part of it as well. So, we're creating content, we're creating actions, we're creating material which can be accessible to people in a wide variety of locations and instances. I think I answered that question, as,
Mm-hmm.
as it
Mm-hmm.
was asked.
Oh yeah. Now, what are your
Mhm.
opinions on non-whites who have served in the military, i.e., have been willing to die for the country? Is his
They've
opinion tied to nation versus state?
Yeah, so I mean, they've been willing to die for the cause which the government has deemed worthy of a war, and of course, you can see this in some of our recent actions on Veterans Day. We are we advocated specifically for the veterans of our nation. While also saying that the wars that they fought for were usually illegitimate. We're pro-veteran but anti-war, which is kind of a hard thing for people to wrap their heads around. But as far as any people of foreign background which have been good civil servants, whether that was in the military, whether they're just really nice people who are firefighters or police officers, or they save puppies and kittens from trees every single day, it's fully possible that they're great people, right? And they can do great things, and they can be great civil servants in some cases. We can talk about, the statistics and the metrics and see, how likely that is in all these foreign populations. We can say that's more or less likely, but it's entirely possible that, foreigners can come to a government and be good civil servants of that. And they can even be better civil servants than on average people of the nation, the indigenous population would be. But that ultimately doesn't change the fact that they do have a foreign background. They are different people. And we have every right as Americans to create, institutions, organizations, movements which advocate for Americans and only Americans. And we have the right to create a society and protect a society which exists for Americans, because ultimately you see with just about all of these other foreign populations which are being brought here, by the manipulators, that they have these things, they have these sovereign nations, they have these nation states around the globe, and it's only ours that is really at risk here. So of course I think it's very possible these can be good people, but it doesn't mean that they're my people.
Yeah, exactly. So, and to the person asking the question, it is not about like, oh, denying goodness in any other race. As he's saying, it is speaking up for yours as it's being decimated, and saying culture is attached to race. I mean, this is a fundamental reality, I think, that we've lost sight of in this world. And this is, so yeah, it's not speaking down to any other races. It's looking for an expression in the thriving existence of ours as well.
And I would also even say that most of the wars that are being fought aren't actually to preserve much of anything. They're offensive wars for the benefit of these multinational corporations, institutions, and all these other nefarious, holders of interest. So, if there was a war like that was fought, maybe it would be different. But right now, I'm not seeing any of this.
Exactly. And Clint Hudson here, he asks a great question.
All right.
Ask how amazing it is to have a group of 100 of your brothers in a room after a successful demonstration in the nation's capital. So yes, let's go into brotherhood a little bit, something that's fundamentally missing in our community as well. Tell us this feeling of brotherhood once you're done with all your comrades doing these kind of demonstrations and you get together and you just share this experience together. What is that like?
Well, I'd say it's fantastic, and it's something that a lot of Americans have really been deprived of the experience, because we no longer have this shared commonality that the nation used to have under its rulers. And what we see, especially after these demonstrations, when everybody gets together, we have these, these social gatherings. What we see is a sort of rekindling of that flame which created the nation and which forged the way forward for most, if not all, of the great events and accomplishments that we see throughout history. So obviously, and evidently, it is a very wonderful experience. And the fact is that in the organization, we have such a nice cohesion among all the people who work together for such a length of time. When you have a lot of activists who have been working together and experiencing the same struggles in forms of, their organizing and even the pressures that are being put on them or attempting to be put on them by all these other institutions or political opposition, that builds a very special bond among people that you don't really see in society at large today. And being having that available to you, it's very special because it's so rare. So I would say it's great, and more people should look for it wherever they can find it.
Yeah, brotherhood is one of the strongest and best things out there, and you're right, it's completely missing in this society. Even like the identity of being an American citizen with your fellow Americans, like even that identity is lost amongst us. We've
Mhm.
become so individualized now, and we hide in our little cubby holes, our comfortable cubby holes with big screen TVs and the internet and all this shit, and we just lost touch of each other, man. It's so sad. It's having experienced brotherhood myself, true brotherhood. I just know it's a magical thing. There's nothing stronger than it. And
Absolutely.
yeah, and even my father, who had served in Vietnam, still meets with his Marine friends to this day. To this day, they drive across country once a year to meet with each other. And it's like that's the power of brotherhood. Even if they don't speak to each other all year, they get together for that special day, and they share these experiences that they had. So yeah, brotherhood is strong. This is third position's all about building brotherhood, and this is
Mhm.
one of our main tenets. So yeah, I completely agree with you, and I agree people should try to experience that more, and you can do that by joining organizations like Patriot Front. Someone asks about your thoughts on Identity Europa. Now, conservative socialist, this is, you asked about Spencer. Now, Identity Europa, are you trying to start drama? Are you just people that I always love when people ask, what do you think about so and so? It's like, well, what do you think about them? Why are you asking me what I think about them? You should have your own opinion
For the
on it.
record, I have no enmity or ill intent towards Identity Europa, and they do a lot of good work. Obviously, we do things differently because we have different ways of approaching a message, and there are things that we agree upon, and there are things that we probably have different beliefs on, and of course, there's lots of differences in organizing and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, I have nothing against them, and I wish them the best of luck with what they're doing.
Once on the same theme, someone asks about the TWP, but they're not even in existence anymore, right? It's
I think it's complicated. I'm not sure actually.
okay. Yeah, so that's that. All right, Thomas, thank you for coming on with me. Thank you for having this conversation. Is there anything you want to finish with? Is there anything you want to tell the viewers of this video? How they can get in touch with you, how they can get in touch with your organization, or anything else?
So I'd just like to say that if you're looking for more content or information about us, you can go to patriotfront.us. And if you're looking for social media accounts and things like that that publish our daily activism or videos, all of the events that I've talked about have been, documented. You can go to the bottom of our website and look at the social media accounts there and the video hosting websites. And if you're looking to read more about us, do that. If you're looking to apply, do that. If you have any questions, we have a contact form. And I'm really happy, and I thank you for having me on. I've been a fan of your videos for quite some time, so it's been a great opportunity to speak with you, and I think it was great, and I hope everybody has a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, too.
Yeah, hopefully well, for sure, this won't be our last time speaking. And for everyone watching this, go check out their activism videos. I personally fucking love the one where they tore up the Antifa village that were protesting against ICE. I love that kind of stuff. I love getting in their face and show legally, none of the
Percussive
members.
redecoration.
Yes, just redecorate. That's all it was. They tried to help out. And as you stated in another interview, it was already pretty messy when you got there.
We
So
didn't have much left to do now.
yeah. No, but I love it. I love it. I love you guys are putting yourselves out there. I love your standing up for what's right. And I know in this scene, everyone likes to criticize each other, but I can honestly say, bravo to you, gentlemen, for going out there and putting forth what you believe in and putting a strong face to it. So On that note, we'll finish this. Thomas, it was a pleasure meeting you and speaking with you.